The Monk and the Gun. It's written and directed by Pawo Choyning Dorji. I'm mispronouncing the name. Choyning Dorji. Fantastic filmmaker, the filmmaker behind Lunana, A Yak in the Classroom. We all love Pemzam. We all love that movie. Does he do himself better with his second outing, The Monk and the Gun? It centers on, quote, it captures the wonder and disruption as Bhutan becomes one of the youngest democracies. What happens is this remote village, they send some kind of census taker to go or whatever to make sure that all the villagers in this small remote village registered to vote, and they also want to test the efficacy of these voters by staging a fake election. So there's that subplot. There's another subplot where a monk who's an assistant to the big monk in the village, the assistant is assigned to get a gun from any of the villagers, and so there's another subplot of the assistant monk, who's a monk himself, going around town, going around these mountains and these remote areas to find, knocking door to door and seeing if people have a gun. There is also another subplot of I don't know if it's an American or just basically a foreigner. It's an American, Bruce? I think,
yeah.
okay,
I think they said he was an American, yeah.
Okay, so he's an American and he's looking for a special gun. Okay, and there is a Bhutanese driver. He has a driver who escorts him around this area to find a special gun, which may be within that area. So you have these three plots and they all intertwine. It's very interesting because Lunana, A Yak in the Classroom was a singular story. Pawo, he intermingles all of these stories, which is interesting. And for me, overall, at 107 minutes rated PG-13, this is as a little bit more leisurely. I mean, I'm not saying Lunana is leisurely, but this one has a little bit more, I don't know, there's a different kind of vibe to this than Lunana. I enjoyed it. It has a little bit of comedy. There is a very nice symbol of an extra appendage or a red limb at the end, which
family show, Greg.
Yeah, it's a family show. There's a family kind of situation that happens at the end, but within the context of Buddhism and what these people are feeling and what they're all about, it actually brings a level of comedy and a little bit of resonance to the proceeding. I really enjoyed The Monk and the Gun. It's a great, solid follow-up to Lunana, A Yak in the Classroom. Eric, your thoughts on the movie?
This one was really good. I wasn't expecting the comedy. It feels like a satire, but I'm not sure if it is. And the only reason I say that is because like with Lunana, Yak in the Classroom, and this, like, it's, as far as I can tell, it's stuff that they've had to deal with. So maybe just by virtue of the fact that people do a thing, that it could be seen as a satire, even though it's not explicitly meant to be. But then there's other things that happen in it that it's like, no, that could not have just been a coincidence or an accident. Like that they're making commentary on something, but I don't know that for sure. I would just say if you watch this as a satire, especially with it opens up with they talk about they want to have the kings relinquishing their power, and the area is going to have their first election. And then the titles say the government's going to teach the people how to run an election. I was like, well, I mean, that sentence alone is just ridiculous. But I mean, how else are you going to do it, I suppose? But just the way the elections are run, the way that the monks, which I guess would be kind of like religion, kind of interferes or messes with things, the way that the people interact and how they have their own kind of thoughts on how elections should be ran or how they misunderstand certain things. The part where the people teaching them how to do an election, one of the things they teach them is, no, you're for blue, so yell at the red people. No, you're red. You need to yell at It's like, that's not a feature. That's a flaw in the election system. The two parties like just going back and forth, and they're literally teaching them how to do that. And not that it's a bad thing, but no, this is what you're supposed to do. They're the other people. You got to hate them. Why? Because, I guess. The ending of this is pretty fantastic. I thought it was going some direction, and it went like, there's no way that you could figure the end would end the way it did. Even knowing that something different's going to come up, I can't imagine anyone would be like, oh yeah, this is going to how it turns out. But it didn't feel like a cheat either. It like kind of earns everything. The only thing this movie's missing is Pemzam, but can't have everything, I guess.
Yeah, and Pemzam is currently, I interviewed Pawo earlier this week and he said Pemzam is in the Royal Academy School over in Bhutan. He's one of her guardians. So hopefully she'll be in one of his movies down the road. Yeah, definitely nice. And Yeah, the ending, I agree with you. The ending was pretty interesting and out of the blue, and I think resonant. Really well done film by Pawo Choyning Dorji. Bruce, your thoughts?
Yeah, I really like this movie too. I think that after seeing two movies, I don't know if it's the filmmaker or if it's a kind of a combination of the filmmaker and just Bhutanese society. You see these movies and you get them. Like you get the basic concept of both movies. Like I would say the first movie is more about young man kind of learning to mature and to like have more meaning for his life than just his own selfish needs. And then there's also kind of a love story as well, but that's kind of the basic path of that movie. And it's like you said, more focused. Whereas this one I think is more of a somewhat of a social satire, but both of them have they are not bound to a Western like pace or exactly plot line or it's just like you're gonna just kind of go with this and you have to kind of settle into the tone and you have to relax a little bit and let it happen. And like you said, the satire here, where some, you might get a satire in America and it might be this really biting, like scathing thing. Here it's just very gentle. Everything's gentle. And it's there if you want to find it. There's a lot of great just little things too. And I think Eric mentioned this offline too, that they walk into this room where there's a couple rooms have TVs, or a couple houses have TVs now in this town, this little village, which seems to gather like 20 people every time there's a TV somewhere. And they're like, the guy comes in and can give me some of that black water or whatever he calls it, which is like a Coke or a Pepsi or whatever. And there's just little moments like that that are just really great. And just little things like there's the foreigner, the American, but the foreigner, he has to travel however many hours to get something, and then he finds out he has to go travel another day to go get something, and then he has to travel another day. And it's just like, hey, you're in Bhutan. If you want to do something, you're going to travel a day to get to it.
Yeah.
Just the interweaving stories, once again, you're not quite sure where they're going, but they all do go someplace. I found this to be quite subtly, like quietly, gently. It didn't make me like just jump up and go, yay, but it kind of made me feel like, yeah, I'm okay. I'm in safe hands. Like we talk about that with Haynes, right? You're in safe hands. I just feel like with this director, I'm in hands and that are going to guide me along, and I'm going to get someplace, and I just have to trust it, and it works. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, we also have to mention the actors involved in both of these movies, Lunana, Yak in the Classroom, and The Monk and the Gun. He doesn't pick real actors. He picks mainly non-actors, and he actually casts people based...
Seems to be working for him.
Yeah, and he casts actors based on their lives. And in Lunana, Pam Zam plays like a character named Pam Zam. And at the end of Lunana, when you see Pam Zam crying, that's actually her crying. It's actually happened in the moment. So a lot of these characters that in both of his films, he draws inspiration from their real lives, and then he writes a story based around their lives. So it's interesting, sort of a neo-realistic touches from both of his films. It gives it a sense of authenticity. Regarding the visual flair, in a second, Eric, you want to say?
Yeah. Does this mean that the one guy was offered 70,000 for a gun and said, no, that's too much?
Yeah, that's a great question. I only had 10 minutes with Pawo. I should have actually asked that question.
Dude, that was such a great scene. Because like the guy translates it back to the foreigner, the American. He's like, what?
Yeah,
it was like an anti what do you call it? Like an anti
deal making thing. Yeah. So that's Eric is referencing a situation where there is a deal situation regarding a very priceless gun. That is Eric's reference to that scene in the film, in The Monk and the Gun. The gun being the one that's very priceless. So 107 minutes, rated PG-13, directed by Pawo Choyning Dorji. Bruce, what's your rating?
My rating. Oh, real quick, I wanted to mention on top of what you just said about the gun. That's a perfect example of how the stakes are so much different. Like in this movie, the stakes are all about a mock election, not even an actual election. It's a mock election, and where the parties are freedom and equality versus conservation versus development. That's the parties that are quote fighting. Anyway, my rating will be 4.5.
4.5 for Bruce. I'm gonna give it 4 stars. What about you, Eric?
I might be 4.5 too. I kind of want to go 5 on this, but I'll go 4.5 with room to grow.
Just because I jump.
Because like I didn't even really catch on to the humor until like about halfway through, and I'm like, oh, this movie's funny. Like I wonder if I go back and watch this, if I'm gonna pick up a lot more comedy that I just wasn't ready for, wasn't expecting early on. Sometimes like you watch it and it's like, oh yeah, that was pretty good. That was a little funny. And then you'll watch it again. Like Boogie Nights, that's a great example. Like I did not see Boogie Nights as a comedy, but after I watched it like 10 times, I'm like, that's one of the funniest movies ever made.
And from both the Monk and the Gun and Lunana Yak in the Classroom, some critics may say, "Oh, it's so visually expressive. It's just so very interesting." But you look at something like Lunana and its beautiful vista shots. I was watching old interviews. They were working on solar power, and they had to lug that camera equipment. That walk to that area was literally the walk they needed. So they only had a certain camera and a tripod and a fixed state. So sometimes simplicity in filmmaking can lead to really visually interesting shots. The same thing with The Monk and the Gun. There aren't any elaborate, amazing takes, but both of these movies, The Monk and the Gun and Lunana Yak in the Classroom, especially because of their location, are very eye-catching movies. 4 for me, 4.5 for both Bruce and Eric. Again, The Monk and the Gun in theaters February 9th.